Okafor, observing the exchange, decides to change the subject to ease the tension. Mr. Okafor. Well, it's a blessing to have someone to share the burdens of daily life. Emeka, why don't you show us around the city later? It's been a while since we visited. Emeka, grateful for the diversion, agrees enthusiastically. Emeka. That sounds like a great idea, Dad. That will be after Mum's visit to the doctor this afternoon. The conversation shifts to plans for the day, but the earlier exchange leaves a lingering sense of unease. Chioma and Emeka share a look, their worry unspoken but clearly communicated. Fade out. 30. Int. Chioma's fashion studio day. The studio is a creative oasis, filled with mannequins dressed in Chioma's designs, sketches pinned to the walls, and fabric samples scattered across the worktable. Chioma sits at her sewing machine, but her usual focus is absent. She stitches absent-mindedly, her gaze drifting off, lost in thought. Cut 2. Chioma stops sewing, pulling the fabric from the machine and examining her work. The seam is uneven, a clear sign of her distraction. She sighs, setting the garment aside and standing up to pace the room. Chioma. Muttering to herself, "What are we doing?" Her eyes catch a sketch on the wall, one of her original designs that sparked her passion for fashion. She reaches out, tracing the lines of the drawing, her expression a mix of determination and doubt. Cut 2. Chioma moves to her drafting table, flipping through her portfolio, each page a testament to her talent and hard work. But the joy these creations usually bring her is overshadowed by her current predicament. Chioma. Softly, to herself. Is all this worth living a lie? Cut 2. The sound of a text message breaks the silence. Chioma checks her phone, finding a message from Emeka. "How are you holding up? Thinking of you." Chioma stares at the message, a wave of emotions crossing her face. She types a reply, then hesitates, deleting it. She starts again, more determined. Chioma's text. "I am okay. How did your mum's hospital visit go?" She sends the message, then places her phone down, taking a deep breath. The brief interaction serves as a reminder of the shared burden and the need for a resolution. Cut 2. Chioma returns to her sewing machine, her resolve firming. She starts working again, the machine humming under her skilled hands. This time, her stitches are straight and purposeful. Chioma. Resolutely, to herself. "We'll find a way through this. Together." The camera pulls back, leaving Chioma to her work, a symbol of her determination to face the challenges ahead, not just in her career but in her personal life as well. Fade out. 31. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home day. The camera follows Mrs. Okafor as she moves through the day, her observant eyes catching subtle interactions between Emeka and Chioma that hint at a deeper relationship than they've admitted. Cut 2. Kitchen. Mrs. Okafor watches from the doorway as Chioma hands Emeka a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing lightly, lingering a moment too long. Their shared glance is quick but charged with an unspoken connection. Mrs. Okafor's eyebrow raises slightly, her suspicion growing. Cut 2. Act 2. Building tensions. 32. EXT. Emeka and Chioma's home exterior compound day. The compound is peaceful in the morning light, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. Mr. Okafor and Emeka are outside. Mr. Okafor looks around appreciatively, clearly proud of what his son has achieved. Mr. Okafor. Admiringly. "You've built a good life here, Emeka. Your mother and I are proud of you." Emeka smiles, gratitude and respect for his father evident in his expression. Emeka. "Thanks, Dad. I've been blessed, truly. I couldn't have done it without you and Mom's support." They stop walking, facing each other. Mr. Okafor places a hand on Emeka's shoulder, his demeanor shifting to one of gentle seriousness. Mr. Okafor. "You've accomplished so much, but there's something else, Something important for your future that we need to talk about. Emeka looks at his father, sensing the direction of the conversation, his smile fading slightly. Emeka. Tentatively. What's on your mind, Dad? Mr. Okafor. It's about settling down, Emeka. You're not getting any younger, and it's time you thought about building a family of your own. Emeka shifts uncomfortably, aware of the complexities of his situation with Chioma and the lie they're living. Emeka. I understand, Dad. I've been thinking about it too. Mr. Okafor. Encouragingly. Good. It's important to find someone who shares your values, someone who can be a partner in every sense. Have you met anyone? Emeka glances towards the house, thoughts of Chioma crossing his mind. He's caught between honesty and the need to protect their secret. Emeka. There's someone special, Dad. But it's complicated. We're figuring things out. Mr. Okafor. Nodding, understandingly. Life is rarely simple, son. But remember, a strong partnership is built on honesty and respect. Your mother and I just want to see you happy. Emeka nods, touched by his father's words and concerned about the implications of their ongoing deception. Emeka. Thanks, Dad. I'll remember that. And I hope you'll like her when the time is right. Mr. Okafor smiles, patting Emeka's back as they resume their walk, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. But Emeka's thoughtful expression remains, the weight of his father's expectations and his own desires for the future lingering in his mind. Fade out. 33. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home kitchen morning. The kitchen is warm with the morning light streaming through the window. Chioma is at the counter, meticulously preparing ingredients for a traditional Nigerian breakfast. Mrs. Okafor enters, observing Chioma's efforts with a critical yet curious eye. Chioma. Cheerfully. Good morning, Mrs. Okafor. I thought I'd prepare something special today. Akara and pap. Mrs. Okafor nods, her expression softening slightly at the mention of the traditional dish. Mrs. Okafor. That's thoughtful of you, Chioma. Do you need any help? Chioma, surprised but pleased by the offer, nods. Chioma. Actually, yes. Would you mind helping me with the beans? As they work side by side, Chioma tries to initiate conversation, hoping to bridge the gap between them. Chioma. Emeka told me you make the best akara in the family. I hope mine comes close. Mrs. Okafor watches Chioma's technique, her gaze sharp. Mrs. Okafor. Critically. Your method is different. In my days, we paid more attention to the texture. It's crucial for the perfect akara. Chioma nods, taking the critique in stride but feeling the underlying tension. Chioma. I'm always eager to learn. Maybe you could show me how it's done. Mrs. Okafor hesitates, then slowly starts to guide Chioma, correcting her technique. The atmosphere remains tense, but there's a glimmer of connection. Cut 2. The akara is frying now, the kitchen filled with its savory aroma. Chioma and Mrs. Okafor stand together, watching the pan. Mrs. Okafor. Softening. You have a good hand, Chioma. With practice, you could master it. Chioma smiles, grateful for the acknowledgement. Chioma. Thank you. It means a lot coming from you. There's a brief moment where Mrs. Okafor looks as if she's about to say more, perhaps share a personal memory or tip, but she stops herself, the walls coming back up. Mrs. Okafor. Formally. Well, let's hope Emeka and his father appreciate the effort. Chioma senses the retreat, feeling the momentary connection slipping away. She offers a smile, though it doesn't quite reach her eyes. Chioma. I hope so too. The scene closes with both women turning their attention back to the cooking, the gap between them narrowed slightly but still palpably present, a mix of traditional expectations and modern realities creating a complex dance of connection and distance. Fade out. 34. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home dining area evening. The dining area is set for the meal, the atmosphere filled with the soft clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation. Emeka, Chioma, Mr. Okafor, and Mrs. Okafor are seated around the table, plates of steaming food before them. The mood is ostensibly relaxed, but an undercurrent of tension runs beneath the surface. Cut 2. Mrs. Okafor is engaging in conversation with Mr. Okafor, but her eyes are sharp, missing nothing. She watches Emeka and Chioma interact, noting the subtle nuances of their relationship. Her gaze sharpens as she observes a moment between them. Cut 2. Emeka reaches for the salt, and Chioma, anticipating his need, passes it to him. Their fingers brush briefly, and they share a quick, knowing glance, a silent communication that speaks volumes. The moment is fleeting, but Mrs. Okafor catches it, her suspicions deepening. Mrs. Okafor. Casually, masking her growing curiosity. Emeka, Chioma seems to know you quite well for just housemates. Emeka and Chioma exchange a quick, nervous glance before Emeka responds, trying to maintain a nonchalant demeanor. Emeka, laughing off the comment. Well, we've lived together for a while now. You pick up on things. Chioma nods in agreement, adding quickly to steer the conversation elsewhere. Chioma. Yes, it's all about good communication, isn't it? Mrs. Okafor nods, seemingly satisfied with the answer, but the wheels in her mind are turning. She continues to observe them throughout the meal, noting the ease between them, the shared smiles, and the occasional, almost imperceptible touches. Cut 2. The dinner conversation moves on to other topics, but Mrs. Okafor remains observant, her gaze frequently returning to Emeka and Chioma. Her eyes narrow slightly each time, piecing together the evidence of a relationship far deeper than what has been acknowledged. Cut 2. As the meal concludes, Mrs. Okafor helps clear the table, her movements deliberate, her mind busy with thoughts. Emeka and Chioma work together to tidy up, their chemistry undeniable. Mrs. Okafor watches them, her suspicions now nearly confirmed. Mrs. Okafor. To herself, contemplatively. There's more to their story. I need to find out what it is. The scene ends with Mrs. Okafor looking on, her expression one of determination mixed with concern, foreshadowing her next steps to uncover the truth about Emeka and Chioma's relationship. Fade out. 35. Int. Chioma's fashion studio day. The studio is a whirlwind of creative energy, but Chioma stands still amidst the chaos, phone pressed to her ear. She's speaking with Nkechi, her frustration evident in her tone and body language. Fabric samples and sketches lay forgotten on the work table beside her. Chioma. Agitatedly. Nkechi, it's getting harder every day. Pretending to be just Emeka's housemate in front of his parents is exhausting. Cut 2. Int. Nkechi's apartment day. Nkechi is on the other end of the call, sitting in her brightly lit living room, a look of concern on her face as she listens to Chioma. Nkechi. Sympathetically. I can only imagine how tough it must be for you both. But you've got to stay strong, Chioma. How's Emeka handling it? Cut back to Chioma's fashion studio. Chioma paces a small area of the studio, her frustration growing as she talks. Chioma. He's trying to keep things normal, but I can see it's wearing on him too. His mom, she's watching us like a hawk. I feel like we're under a microscope. Cut 2. Nkechi's apartment. Nkechi nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. Nkechi. And the longer this goes on, the harder it'll be to come clean. Have you thought about just telling him the truth? Cut back to Chioma's fashion studio. Chioma stops pacing, considering Nkechi's words. The idea seems both freeing and terrifying. Chioma. Every day, Nkechi. But Emeka's worried about his mom's health. We don't want to cause any unnecessary stress. She sighs, running a hand through her hair in frustration. Chioma. But this lie, it's starting to feel like a prison. I miss just being us, without all these secrets. Cut 2. Nkechi's apartment. Nkechi leans forward, her expression earnest. Nkechi. Maybe it's time to reevaluate which is more stressful, living a lie or revealing the truth. You and Emeka need to be on the same page, whatever you decide. Cut back to Chioma's fashion studio. Chioma nods, the weight of Nkechi's advice sinking in. Chioma. You're right, we need a long talk about this. Thanks, Nkechi. I needed to hear that. Cut 2. Nkechi's apartment. Nkechi smiles softly, offering what comfort she can from afar. Nkechi. Anytime, Chioma. Remember, whatever happens, you're not alone. Cut back to Chioma's fashion studio. The call ends, and Chioma stands alone in her studio, surrounded by her designs but distracted by the turmoil of her personal life. She takes a deep breath, steadying herself for the conversation ahead with Emeka. Fade out. 36. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home living room evening. The living room is cast in the soft glow of evening light, creating a serene atmosphere. Chioma sits on the sofa, her posture tense, a clear sign of the stress she's been carrying. Emeka sits beside her, turning to face her, his expression one of concern and determination. Emeka. Gently. Chioma. I know these past few days have been tough on us. Chioma looks at Emeka, her eyes reflecting a mix of frustration and fatigue. Chioma. Emeka, how much longer can we keep this up? It's wearing us down, living like strangers in our own home. Emeka takes Chioma's hands in his, holding them tightly as he speaks with conviction. Emeka. I promise you, this is only temporary. Once my parents leave, we can go back to being ourselves again. I hate this as much as you do. Chioma pulls her hands away gently, standing to pace the room, her mind racing with thoughts and emotions. Chioma. But what if your mom's health doesn't improve quickly? What if they decide to stay longer? Emeka, I don't know if I can keep pretending for weeks. Or even months. Emeka stands, closing the distance between them, his voice firm yet filled with empathy. Emeka. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But no matter what happens, I'm here with you. We're in this together, remember. He reaches out, gently turning Chioma to face him, ensuring she sees the sincerity in his eyes. Emeka. And I'll talk to them, find the right moment to explain our relationship. We'll find a way to make them understand. Chioma looks into Emeka's eyes, searching for the reassurance she so desperately needs. After a moment, she nods, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resolve. Chioma. Softly. I trust you, Emeka. It's just hard, feeling like we're hiding from the world. From your parents. Emeka. I know, and I'm sorry you have to go through this. But it won't be forever. I promise. Emeka wraps Chioma in a comforting embrace, the kind that says without words that they'll weather this storm together. Mrs. Okafor enters the room unexpectedly, and they quickly pull apart, a flash of panic in their eyes before they mask it with smiles. Mrs. Okafor, curiously. What are you two doing? Chioma. Just going over some household things, budgets and bills. Mrs. Okafor nods, but her eyes linger on the pair as she considers her answer. She sits down while Emeka and Chioma makes their way out of the living room. Fade out. 37. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home living room same day. The living room is quiet, save for the low hum of conversation between Mr. Okafor and Mrs. Okafor, who are seated on a comfortable couch. Mrs. Okafor's expression is one of mild frustration and confusion as she gestures with her hands, emphasizing her points. Mrs. Okafor. Concerned. I just don't understand why Emeka would choose to live with a housemate, especially a female one. It's not proper, and it's certainly not how we raised him. Mr. Okafor listens patiently, his demeanor calm and understanding. He nods, acknowledging her concerns, but there's a hint of caution in his voice. Mr. Okafor. I know. It's unusual, but Emeka is an adult now. We have to trust that he knows what he's doing. Besides, Chioma seems like a respectable young woman. Mrs. Okafor shakes her head, her worry palpable. Mrs. Okafor. Respectable or not, it's just not right. What will people say? And it's not just about reputation. It's about what's proper. I just wish he'd consider those things more. Mr. Okafor reaches out, placing a gentle hand on her arm to soothe her. Mr. Okafor. Gently. I understand your concerns, but you need to take things easy, especially with your blood pressure. The doctor was very clear about avoiding stress. Mrs. Okafor's expression softens at the mention of her health, a reminder of the need to prioritize her well-being. Mrs. Okafor. Sighing. You're right, I shouldn't let this upset me so much. But it's hard not to worry about Emeka and the choices he's making. Mr. Okafor. Reassuringly. Let's just keep an eye on things and talk to Emeka openly about our concerns. He values your opinion more than you know. And remember, your health comes first. We'll handle this together, calmly. Mrs. Okafor nods, taking a deep breath, her posture relaxing slightly. She leans into her husband, grateful for his support and the reminder to focus on her health amidst her worries. Mrs. Okafor. Softly. Thank you. We'll talk to him. Together. The couple shares a moment of quiet understanding, united in their concern for Emeka but mindful of the need to approach the situation with care and consideration for everyone's well-being. Fade out. 38. EXT. Emeka and Chioma's home exterior compound afternoon. The compound is bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. Chioma is tending to some potted plants when a car pulls up. Nkechi steps out, her attire and demeanor reflecting traditional values, with a modern twist that speaks to her personality. Chioma. Smiling widely. Nkechi, you made it. Nkechi and Chioma share a warm hug, their easy camaraderie evident. Cut 2. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor step out into the compound, curious about the visitor. Emeka follows closely behind, ready to introduce Nkechi to his parents. Emeka. To his parents. Mom, Dad, this is Nkechi, Chioma's close friend. Nkechi steps forward, greeting Mr. and Mrs. Okafor with a respectful bow, her hands clasped together in a traditional gesture. Nkechi. Respectfully. Good afternoon, sir, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet Emeka's wonderful parents finally. Mrs. Okafor's expression softens at Nkechi's respectful greeting, a hint of approval in her eyes. Mrs. Okafor. Pleased. Such good manners. It's lovely to meet you too, Nkechi. Mr. Okafor nods in agreement, clearly impressed by Nkechi's demeanor. Mr. Okafor. Yes, welcome. 39. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home living room evening. The group moves to a sitting area in the compound, where they engage in light conversation. Nkechi's knowledge of traditional customs and her ability to articulate her thoughts with grace endears her further to the Okafors, especially Mrs. Okafor. Mrs. Okafor. To Nkechi. It's refreshing to see young people who still respect and uphold our traditions. You must come from a good home. Nkechi smiles, acknowledging the compliment. Nkechi. Thank you, Mom. My parents did their best to instill those values in me. It's important to remember where we come from. Chioma watches the interaction, a smile on her face, but with a hint of concern in her eyes, aware of the contrast between Nkechi's immediate acceptance and her own more complicated relationship with Emeka's parents. Cut 2. As the visit continues, the warmth between Nkechi and the Okafors grows. Emeka and Chioma exchange glances, both relieved and slightly worried about the ease with which Nkechi has charmed his parents. Fade out. 40. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home living room evening same day. The living room is cozy and warm, filled with the soft chatter of Emeka, Chioma, Mr. Okafor, and Mrs. Okafor enjoying a relaxed evening together. They're seated comfortably, with Emeka and Chioma on opposite sides to maintain the guise as housemates. Cut 2. Laughter fills the room as Mr. Okafor shares a humorous story from his youth. Everyone is engaged, the mood light and cheerful. Emeka, caught up in the moment, turns to Chioma with a fond look. Emeka, laughing, momentarily forgetting the act, remember when we. He catches himself mid-sentence, the realization of his mistake washing over him. The room goes silent, all eyes turning towards him, the laughter dying down. Emeka, quickly recovering. Heard about that similar story from Nkechi. Yeah, Nkechi told us something like that. Right, Chioma. Chioma, recognizing the slip, jumps in to save the situation. Chioma, nervously laughing. Oh, yes, Nkechi has all sorts of stories. Always keeps us entertained. Mrs. Okafor watches the exchange closely, her eyes narrowing slightly in suspicion. Mr. Okafor, however, seems to take the save at face value, chuckling. Mr. Okafor. Nkechi sounds like a character. We must hear more from her next time. Emeka nods, relieved but still tense from the close call. Mrs. Okafor, however, remains quiet, her gaze lingering on Emeka and Chioma, clearly pondering the implications of Emeka's near slip-up. Mrs. Okafor. Curiously, to Emeka. It's lovely to see how well you all get along. Friendship is such a blessing. Her words, though seemingly innocent, carry an undercurrent of scrutiny. Emeka and Chioma share a quick, uneasy glance, both aware that the moment has heightened Mrs. Okafor's suspicions. Cut 2. The evening continues, but the atmosphere has shifted. Emeka and Chioma are more cautious, their interactions measured. Mrs. Okafor's observational gaze serves as a reminder of the thin ice they tread, the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Fade out. 41. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home guest bedroom night. The room is softly lit, creating a serene atmosphere. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor are preparing for bed, the day's events providing much material for a quiet conversation. Mrs. Okafor sits on the edge of the bed, her expression troubled, while Mr. Okafor moves about the room, his demeanor more contemplative. Mrs. Okafor, with concern, something doesn't sit right with me about Emeka and Chioma's arrangement. Did you notice how he almost slipped up this evening? Mr. Okafor, pausing in his movements, turns to his wife, nodding slowly. Mr. Okafor. I did. It was a close call. But, my dear, perhaps we're reading too much into it. They're young, they're bound to have close friends. Mrs. Okafor stands, pacing a little, her worry not so easily assuaged. Mrs. Okafor. It's not just about being close. There's a familiarity between them. It's more intimate than just housemates or friends. Mr. Okafor approaches, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Mr. Okafor. Calmly. Even if there is something more, confronting them without understanding the full situation could push Emeka away. We need to tread carefully. Mrs. Okafor looks up at her husband, her expression softening slightly at his counsel, but her concern remains. Mrs. Okafor. Adamantly. I just want what's best for Emeka. If they're involved, he should be open with us. We deserve the truth. Mr. Okafor. Agreeing. And we'll get it, in time. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt for now. Besides, stressing over this won't help, especially with your blood pressure. Mrs. Okafor sighs, the mention of her health a reminder of the need to maintain her own well-being amidst her concerns for her son. Mrs. Okafor. Resignedly. You're right, I'll try to put my worries aside. But I'm keeping my eyes open. For Emeka's sake. Mr. Okafor nods, understanding the protective instinct driving his wife's concern. He pulls her into a gentle embrace, offering comfort. Mr. Okafor. We both want what's best for him. Let's just watch, listen, and support him. That's all we can do. The couple shares a moment of silent agreement, united in their concern for Emeka but differing in their approach. The conversation ends as they prepare to sleep, the room quiet but the air still charged with unspoken anxieties. Fade out. 42. Int. Emeka and Chioma's home, their bedroom night. The room is dimly lit, the tension palpable. Chioma stands by the window, her arms crossed, while Emeka paces back and forth. The strain of maintaining their facade is evident in their expressions, a storm brewing between them. Chioma. Frustrated. We can't keep doing this, Emeka. It's lying to everyone we care about, including ourselves. Emeka stops pacing, turning to face Chioma, his own frustration matching hers. Emeka. What do you suggest we do, then? Just come clean and hope for the best. You know how my parents are, especially my mom. The news could. He trails off, unable to finish the thought, the weight of the potential consequences heavy on his mind. Chioma. Insistently. Yes, Emeka, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. This situation is tearing us apart. Can't you see that? Emeka runs a hand through his hair, a gesture of stress and uncertainty. Emeka. I see it, Chioma, but I also see the risk. My mom's health, her reaction. I can't be the cause of any harm to her. Chioma. Softening slightly. I understand your concern for your mom, I do. But living this lie, it's not healthy for us either. There has to be another way. Emeka looks at Chioma, the love he has for her clashing with his fear of the fallout. Emeka. Pleadingly. Chioma, please, just a little longer. Let's find the right moment to tell them, together. Chioma shakes her head, tears of frustration and fear welling in her eyes. Chioma. And when will that be, Emeka? When it's too late for us. I can't. I won't live in the shadows anymore. The moment hangs between them, a chasm that threatens to widen with every word unsaid and every action postponed. Emeka. Desperately. I'm scared, Chioma. I'm scared of losing them, of losing you. I don't know what to do. Chioma moves closer to Emeka, their anger giving way to mutual fear and uncertainty. Chioma. Softly. I'm scared too, but I know we can't build a future on a foundation of lies. We need to face this, together. They stand in silence, the turmoil of their emotions swirling around them. The room feels smaller, the decision looming large. Fade out. 43. EXT. Emeka and Chioma's home, exterior compound, dusk. The compound is quiet, with the soft hues of dusk painting a serene backdrop. Mr. Okafor and Emeka are seated on a bench, a comfortable silence between them. The air is filled with the weight of unspoken words, the tension of the day lingering. Emeka. Breaking the silence. Dad, can I talk to you about something? Mr. Okafor turns to his son, his expression open and attentive. Mr. Okafor. Of course, Emeka, you know you can tell me anything. Emeka hesitates, gathering his thoughts. His demeanor reflects the internal struggle of wanting to share his burdens without revealing too much. Emeka. It's just, sometimes, the pressure feels overwhelming. The expectations, the responsibilities. It's a lot to carry. Mr. Okafor nods, understanding the general sentiment but unaware of the specific context of Emeka's turmoil. Mr. Okafor. Reassuringly. I understand, son. Life can throw a lot at you, especially at your age. But remember, you're not alone. Your mother and I, we're here for you, no matter what. Emeka looks at his father, the assurance comforting yet simultaneously deepening his guilt over the deception. Emeka: I know, Dad, and I appreciate that more than you can imagine. It's just, sometimes I worry I'm not living up to what's expected of me. Mr. Okafor leans forward, placing a hand on Emeka's shoulder, his voice firm and sincere. Mr. Okafor: Emeka, you've already achieved so much. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder. All we want is for you to be happy and healthy. Don't ever forget that. Emeka's eyes well up with unshed tears, touched by his father's words. He nods, a lump forming in his throat. Emeka: Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear you say that. I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Mr. Okafor, with a gentle smile: You'll find your way, son. And we'll support you, every step of the way. Trust yourself, and trust that we love you, no matter what. They share a moment of silent understanding, the bond between them strengthened by the conversation.